The notification appeared on the cell phone screen during dessert. A judicial block alert. Accounts frozen and seized. Robert froze. Beside him, Valerie laughed with the guests, telling them about her last weekend in the Bahamas. At the end of the table, Robert, his 72-year-old father, was already gone. 30 minutes earlier, after being called a walking burden, the old man had done something. Something that Charles would not understand until the lawyer called at 8 in the morning the next day. The war had begun, but the ungrateful son still did not know he had already lost. But before telling you how this birthday dinner turned into a nightmare, let me tell you what that message said that Robert sent under the table. Because those 5 words changed everything. Robert never forgot the bitter taste of that night. It was not the cheap tequila they had served him. It was the taste of betrayal coming out of his own son's mouth. The table was full. 12 people Robert did not know. Friends of Charles and Valerie. All well-dressed, talking loudly, laughing in that forced way of people who drink too much and fake intimacy. Robert was sitting at the end, wearing his linen shirt, the nicest one he owned, holding a glass of water because his stomach could no longer handle alcohol since he started taking blood pressure medication. Charles was celebrating his 40th, the boy he had raised alone after the death of Rose, the man he had clothed, fed, and educated with every single dollar he could save working as a teacher or a mechanic. Robert had arrived at that luxurious apartment on the Upper East Side with a simple gift wrapped in brown paper, his father's pocket watch, antique silver with engraved initials, a family heirloom, something worth more than any number in a bank account. Valerie had opened the door. She did not even look him in the eyes, just giving him that tight smile she always had when she saw him, as if he were a stain on the pristine white wall of her perfect life. "Good evening, Robert. Come in. The others are already in the living room." She never called him father-in-law, much less dad. Robert walked in. The apartment smelled of expensive perfume and imported candles. Everything in there screamed money. The fine hardwood floors, the massive paintings on the wall, the leather couches that looked like they had never been used. Robert felt small, out of place, like an intruder at his own son's party. During dinner, he was practically invisible. They talked about trips to the Bahamas, electric cars, and cryptocurrency investments. Robert smiled politely. He ate slowly, trying not to make noise with the silverware, as if his presence were an annoyance. And then Valerie started. "You know, guys, there are people who simply do not understand their place in life." She said it, looking at him discreetly but directly. "They end up depending on others instead of fending for themselves." Some people laughed softly. Charles was drinking red wine. He did not say anything. Robert felt his heart tighten, but he took a deep breath. He was not going to give her that satisfaction. And then came the blow. Charles, already on his 3rd glass with glassy eyes and that crooked smile of someone who has lost their filter, looked at Robert and blurted out in front of everyone, "Dad, frankly, you are only good for spending money." The noise at the table stopped for a second, then returned with nervous laughter. Charles continued, "Ever since Mom died, it has been nothing but bills, nothing but problems. We are tired of funding your things." Funding his things? Robert felt something break inside him. It was not just his heart. It was something deeper. It was the image he had of his son, of the little boy he had sworn to protect, of the man he thought would be different. The table carried on. Someone changed the subject. Valerie served dessert, an imported tiramisu that cost more than Robert's electric bill, and everyone went back to laughing, talking as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Robert looked around, saw those strangers, that cold luxury, that son he no longer recognized, and made a decision with trembling hands. Not out of fear, but out of an icy rage that rises slowly. Robert took out his cell phone under the table. He opened his messages, found the contact for Attorney Miller, the lawyer who had advised him 3 days earlier. He wrote a single line. "You can start the action immediately." Send. Robert sat there, finished his water, took his napkin, and wiped his mouth calmly. Nobody noticed. He was invisible. Remember? The table kept laughing. Valerie was telling a story about a designer bag she had bought on Fifth Avenue. Charles was refilling his glass until his cell phone vibrated on his plate. He looked at the screen and the color drained from his face. Robert stood up. He grabbed his bag. He looked at his son, that 40-year-old man he no longer knew, and said with the steadiest voice he could find, "Charles, thank you for the dinner. I hope you like the watch. It belonged to your grandfather. But maybe you are no longer interested in those kinds of things." Robert walked out into the hallway. He could still hear Valerie whisper, "What a drama queen! Oh my God!" Robert smiled for the first time in months, because he was not the one causing drama. He was the man who had just reclaimed his dignity. But what Robert still did not know was that in the following minutes, Charles's phone was going to explode with notifications, and what was written on that screen was going to change absolutely everything. But before telling you what happened after that cursed dinner, you need to understand who Robert really was, and what he had done for that son to be sitting at that table humiliating his own father. Let me tell you who he really was. Not the old man who was only good for spending money, but the man who built a man from nothing. Robert was 72 years old, with calloused hands from repairing so many engines, an aching back from carrying so many heavy tools, and a heart that should have stopped beating a long time ago. But he stubbornly kept going. He had been a master mechanic in auto shops for 40 years. It was not a glamorous job. Robert used to wake up at 5 in the morning, take 2 crowded buses, and spend the whole day on his feet in the unbearable heat of those shops, prepping engines, repairing transmissions, getting his hands stained with oil. His uniform always smelled of gasoline. His nails were never completely clean, no matter how hard he scrubbed them. But he was honest. He had dignity, and he paid the bills. When Robert met Rose, he was 24 years old, and she was 22. She was a nurse, worked in hospitals, and had this sweet smile that melted him. They got married in a simple ceremony at the neighborhood church. The reception was at Robert's mother's house, with snacks he had prepared himself and cheap beer. 3 years later, Charles was born, and my God, how Robert loved that little boy. He was small, had a lot of colic, cried all night long. But when he looked at Robert with his dark little eyes, Robert felt he would do anything for him. Absolutely anything. And that is exactly what he did. Charles was 9 years old when Rose was diagnosed with breast cancer. Robert still remembered the day the doctor called them into that cold little room in the public hospital. He remembered the smell of rubbing alcohol and disinfectant. He remembered holding his wife's hand and feeling it tremble. "Advanced stage," the doctor had said, as if he were talking about the weather. Rose lived for 2 more years. 2 years of chemotherapy, of hospital stays, of watching that strong woman wither away in front of him. She could no longer work. Robert became the sole source of income for the household. Do you know what it is like to support an entire family on an auto mechanic's salary? It is working miracles with beans and rice. It is wearing the same clothes for years. It is buying nothing for yourself because every penny counts. But Charles had to study. He wanted to be an engineer, and Robert was going to make that happen even if it killed him. When it was time for private high school, Robert had no money. He had no savings. He had nothing but a pair of gold earrings his grandmother had left him. Antique gold with tiny pearls. He kept them in a small wooden box and only used them on special occasions. Robert took them to Mr. Gerald's jewelry store right there on the market street. He weighed them, looked at them through that jeweler's loop, and offered Robert a price. "It is not much despite the sentimental value, Robert," he had said with pity. Robert smiled. "The sentimental value is seeing my son graduate." He sold them. Charles passed the entrance exam to a prestigious private university. The tuition back then was $2,000 a semester. Robert's salary was barely over $1,000 a month. Robert did the math. It was not going to work. So he started doing plumbing jobs on Saturdays. Houses of wealthy ladies in the suburbs who paid cash. Robert would leave the auto shop on Friday afternoon. He would take the crowded bus. He would get home around 8 at night, and on Saturday at 7 in the morning, he was already holding a wrench, fixing pipes for people who had never washed a dish in their lives. On Sundays, Robert spent the day lying on the couch because his legs could no longer hold him up. That lasted 5 years. 5 years paying for that school dollar by dollar. 5 years without buying new clothes, without getting a haircut, without eating at restaurants. Robert lived on reheated leftovers and black coffee. Rose died during the 3rd year of Charles's studies. It was fast at the end. 1 week she was still talking to Robert. The next, she would not wake up. Robert buried his wife with money he borrowed from his brother Jared, and he kept paying for the school. When Charles graduated, he got a good job at a construction company. 2 years later, he came to talk to Robert about a girl he had met, Valerie. She is a lawyer, the daughter of a real estate developer. "She is different, Dad," Charles had said with a spark in his eyes. She was different indeed. From the very beginning of the relationship, Charles began to change. He started to feel ashamed of the simple house where he had grown up. He stopped visiting Robert on Sundays. When Robert called, Charles answered more and more briefly. "I'm busy, Dad. Let us talk later." But the worst was yet to come. When they decided to get married, Charles asked Robert for help. They needed a down payment for an apartment. "A good place, Dad, to start our lives properly." Robert had the house, the same house where he and Rose had lived for 28 years. It was not big, it was not luxurious, but it was theirs. It was the only asset he had in the world. Robert sold it for $300,000. He gave $200,000 to his son. "This is so you can get a good start, son," Robert had said, handing him the check. Charles had hugged him. "Thank you, Dad. I'm going to pay you back. You can be sure of that." He never paid him back. Robert moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the south side. The rent was about $300 a month. It rained inside when there were storms. The bathroom had mold, but it was what Robert could afford on his $600 pension. And Charles. Charles had bought an apartment on the Upper East Side. 3 bedrooms, a balcony, 2 parking spaces. Robert went to visit him exactly once. Valerie did not even offer him a cup of coffee. But Robert still had not grasped the sheer magnitude of the ingratitude. He still thought it was just a phase, that his son would go back to being the man he knew. Until 3 months before that dinner, Robert discovered something that made his blood run cold. The truth began to crumble on an ordinary Tuesday in March. Robert was walking back from the pharmacy carrying a small bag with his monthly medications, blood pressure pills, cholesterol medication, and an antacid, because his stomach burned all the time from stress. He had spent $50. More than half of it had come out of his own pocket because the new blood pressure medication was not covered by his insurance. Robert sat down at the bus stop to rest. His legs ached, osteoarthritis in his left knee. The doctor had told him he needed physical therapy, but each session cost $30. Impossible. That was when Irene sat down next to him. She worked as a janitor in an office building downtown. They knew each other from church. "Robert, what a coincidence running into you here." They made small talk, the weather, grocery prices, crime in the city. And then she blurted out, with zero malice, "Yesterday I saw your son and his wife leaving the building where I work. What a beautiful woman, oh my lord, and so elegant. She was carrying a gorgeous bag. It looked like the ones from the magazines." Robert's heart tightened. "Do they work there?" "Oh, I do not know if they work there. But they were walking out of Le Bernardin, that fancy restaurant downtown. Do you know how much it costs to eat there? My daughter went once and paid $90 for one dish. A single dish." Robert gave a weak smile. $90 for one dish. Robert would eat lunch for $3 at a burger joint. "Well, it is great that they are doing well, right? Your son became very successful in life. You must be proud." "Proud?" Robert got home and did what he should not have done. He opened Instagram. He had created an account months ago, just to be able to see the pictures Charles posted. Charles did not follow him back. Valerie had a private profile, but Charles's was public. Robert started scrolling through the screen, and every single photo was a stab wound. Valerie standing in front of a Louis Vuitton store, holding shopping bags. The caption read, "A gift to myself because I deserve it." Charles at an expensive Japanese restaurant, with those sushi platters that look like works of art. Caption, "Blessed Friday." Both of them on a beach in the Bahamas, on a lounge chair facing the crystal clear blue sea. Valerie in a red bikini, him shirtless, colorful cocktails in their hands. Caption, "Recharging energy in paradise." The Bahamas. They had gone to the Bahamas. Robert kept scrolling, a picture of a new car in the parking lot, a shiny silver BMW. The newest member of the family has arrived. Pictures of expensive restaurants, imported wines, five-star hotels, designer clothes. And meanwhile, 3 weeks earlier, Robert had called Charles to ask him to borrow $100 to buy his medications because his pension check was late. "Dad, things are tight this month. Let me see if I can do it next week." He never could. Robert paid for his medications with the money he had saved to buy a new blanket. His old one was torn. Robert spent the entire winter shivering from the cold under a blanket full of holes, because his son did not have $100 to lend him, but had the money for a BMW. Robert kept digging like a madman. He admitted it, but he needed to understand. He discovered that they no longer lived in the apartment they had bought with his money. They had rented that one out. Now they were living in a penthouse on the Upper East Side. Robert looked up the address on Google. Penthouses there started at around $1 million. $1 million. And Robert was paying $300 for an apartment where it rained inside. But the absolute worst was yet to come. It was Pauline who told Robert. The same woman who worked in Valerie's building called Robert on a Thursday night. "Robert, I have to tell you something. I do not know if it is right, but you need to know." Robert's stomach churned. "Today I was cleaning the boardroom, and I heard Valerie talking to some lawyer friends. She was talking about you." Heavy silence. "What did they say, Pauline?" "Valerie was laughing. She said that you called like a desperate man begging for help, that it was a huge burden having a father-in-law with no financial structure, that people from your generation did not know how to save money, and that now the kids had to clean up the mess." Every single word was a bullet. And do you know what she said at the end? Silence. Thank God I convinced Charles to cut the umbilical cord. If it had been up to him, he would still be paying him an allowance. Robert hung up. He could not even thank Pauline. He sat on the kitchen floor and cried. He cried out everything he had been holding in for months, maybe years. Umbilical cord? As if he were dead weight hanging onto his life. As if he had not sold his house to make the down payment on his apartment. As if he had not worked for 40 years until his body gave out. As if he had not raised that man all by himself, with calloused hands and a broken heart. That night, Robert barely slept. He stared at the cracked ceiling of his apartment, listening to the rats running in the drop ceiling, and he thought, how much longer? How much longer was he going to accept being treated like garbage? How much longer was he going to pretend everything was fine? How much longer was he going to let his own son humiliate him? Right there, on that cold floor, in that silent dawn, something inside Robert died. It was not love. A father's love does not die. It is stubborn. It insists, even when it should not. What died was the fear of losing him. Because, to be honest, Robert had already lost him a long time ago. And in place of that fear, something else was born. A cold, calculated, determined certainty. If his son had forgotten what Robert had done for him, Robert was going to remind him in the worst possible way. And it was exactly that week when something happened, something that pushed Robert over the edge, the straw that broke the camel's back. And that was when Robert decided, enough is enough. The pipe burst on a Monday morning, 6:30. Robert was still sleeping when he heard the sound of gushing water. He jumped out of bed, stepping onto a soaked floor. The water was coming from inside the bathroom wall, pouring out of a crack Robert did not even know existed. In 5 minutes, half the apartment was flooded. Robert had tried to turn off the main valve by himself, but his hand was shaking so badly he could not do it. He called the building manager, a grumpy man who always looked at him lazily. The guy shut the valve off, grumbling, "You're going to have to tear down the wall, replace all the piping. It is going to cost about $1,200, $1,500. Robert felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. $1,200? Yes, and it has to be fast. If we leave this, everything will rot. Mold, leaks. It could even compromise the structure." He left. Robert stood there, staring at his ruined apartment. The water had soaked his mattress, his clothes, the few things he owned. The smell of mold was already starting to spread. Robert called Charles, 8:15 in the morning. It rang 6 times. No one answered. Robert sent a text message. "Son, I need to talk to you. It is urgent." Charles replied 3 hours later. "I am in a meeting, Dad. I will call you later." He did not call. The next day, Robert finally managed to get him on the phone. Charles did not even ask if he was okay. "Well, Dad, what happened? Make it quick. I'm heading out to a lunch." Robert explained everything. The water, the pipes, the damage, the $1,200 the plumber was asking for to fix it. Silence on the other end, then a sigh. The kind of sigh that carries irritation, impatience. "Dad, I cannot keep solving these things. You have no savings. Did you not set anything aside for these emergencies? I have my own bills, my own responsibilities. I cannot fund everything." Fund. That word again. "Charles, I am not asking for a handout. It is a loan. I will pay you back." Another sigh. "Dad, things are tight. Really tight. We just bought the car. There are the monthly payments, the condo fees, 1,000 things. Valerie is keeping me on a tight leash with the budget. I cannot just pull money out of thin air." Robert stayed quiet. He could not speak. His throat closed up. Charles continued. And then came the final blow. "Frankly, Dad, you are 72 years old. Should you not have planned better? Saved some money?" "I do not know. One cannot depend on their kids for everything. Life is like that. Everyone has to fend for themselves." Every word was a slap in the face. "I have to hang up. Let us talk later. Try to work it out with the building management. Get them to set up a payment plan." "I do not know them." He hung up. Robert stood there holding the phone, staring at the black screen, and something inside him shattered completely. It was no longer sadness. It was rage. A deep, silent rage that burns inside but makes no sound. Everyone has to fend for themselves. This was the son he had raised. This was the man he had clothed, fed, educated, the one he had carried in his arms when he had a fever, the one he had stayed awake for in the early morning hours making bottles, the one for whom he had paid for school, a car, an apartment. And now Robert had to fend for himself. Robert went to the bank that afternoon. He took out a personal loan for $1,500. The interest rate was 95% annually. It was going to take him a year and a half to pay it off. With the interest, it would turn into almost $2,000. Robert signed the paperwork with a trembling hand. He went back home. The plumber came the next day. He tore down the wall. He replaced the pipes. He left everything dirty with dust and debris. He charged $1,200 in cash. Robert paid. He had $300 left to get through the rest of the month. That night, sitting on the kitchen floor, eating rice with an egg because he had no money for anything else, Robert made a decision. He stood up. He went to the old closet he had in the bedroom. He opened the bottom drawer where he kept old documents. He dug beneath the certificates, the paid invoices, the yellowing papers, and found a thick brown folder with a notary seal. Inside, a document he had forgotten existed. A public deed of donation with a revocation clause for ingratitude. His wife Rose had insisted he do that when he gave the money to Charles. Back then, Robert had found it exaggerated, almost offensive. Love does not need this. He is our son. He would never do. But Rose, already sick, already seeing the end approaching, had looked at him with her sunken eyes and had said, "Robert, protect your future. I am not going to be here to defend you. So put it on paper. Trust, but document. Robert had cried. It had seemed cruel to him to think that his son could be ungrateful. But he did it because Rose asked him to. Because she insisted. Because deep down she knew what Robert refused to admit. Robert read the entire document. Every line, every clause. It was all there. Registered, legal, valid. In the event of severe ingratitude, material or moral abandonment, disrespect or offense to the dignity of the donor, the present donation may be legally revoked, and the donee must restitute the updated value or its equivalent in assets. Severe ingratitude, moral abandonment, disrespect. His son had done all of that, and more. Robert grabbed his cell phone, searched on Google, Lawyer Donation Revocation New York. Several popped up. He chose one with good reviews and sent a text message. The next day, Robert was in his office. Attorney Miller in his 50s, gray hair, a serious but kind gaze. Robert told him everything. Every humiliation, every slight, every broken promise. The lawyer listened in silence. He took the document, analyzed it. Robert, you have a very solid case. This document is bulletproof. The law is on your side. Robert felt something awaken within him. It was not revenge. It was justice. How long does it take? It depends. But with this evidence, with witnesses, it can move fast. 3, 4 months. And if he does not want to pay? Asset seizure, frozen accounts. The justice system forces it. Robert smiled for the first time in several weeks. Then let us do it. Are you sure? He is your son. Do you not want to try talking to him first? Robert looked at him and said with a firmness he did not even know he possessed, I tried for 4 years. Now it is the justice system's turn to try. 3 days later, Robert received the invitation for Charles's birthday, a dinner at his house with friends. Robert looked at the invitation, looked at the document in his closet, and knew exactly what to do. He would go to that dinner. He would go with his simple gift and his broken heart. But this time he would not leave as the poor old man. He would leave as the man who had finally learned to respect himself. The deed was there in front of him, on the kitchen table. Letterhead paper, signatures certified by the notary, witnesses recorded in the ledger. Robert took his cup of reheated coffee. He never threw coffee away. He always reheated it. And he reread every word of that document for the umpteenth time. The date jumped out at his face, September 18th, 2007. Years ago, Robert remembered that day as if it were yesterday. Rose was hospitalized. She had suffered a severe crisis the night before. The doctors had said it was a matter of weeks, but she had insisted on leaving the hospital for a few hours. I have to take care of something important, she had said. They went straight to the notary, Robert on one side holding her up, practically keeping her on her feet. She was thin, jaundiced, breathing with difficulty, but she was determined. The notary, a man with thick glasses named Mr. Vance, had read the document out loud in that little room that smelled of old paper and coffee. Donation of $200,000 to the son, Charles Robert, with a revocation clause in the event of ingratitude, material or moral abandonment, offense to the dignity of the donor. Robert had looked at Rose. My love, this is not necessary. He is our son. She had squeezed his hand, that cold, thin hand, covered in bruises from the hospital needles. Robert, I'm going to die. Maybe in a week, maybe in 2. But you are going to stay, and I need to know that you are protected. But he would never do... Rose's voice had come out steady, even though it was hoarse. People change, especially when they get married. I saw how that girl looks at you. I saw it, and I did not like it. So do this for me. Sign this paper, even if you never need to use it. Robert had signed it in tears. He thought it was cruel, distrustful, an insult to his son. Rose died 11 days later, and now, 7.5 years later, Robert was standing there holding that piece of paper as if it were gold, because it was gold. It was his dignity printed in black ink. Attorney Miller had explained everything to him in detail during that first consultation. Robert, this kind of clause exists exactly for this reason, to protect donors against ungrateful children. The law allows for revocation when there is severe ingratitude. But what is considered severe ingratitude? Insults, abandonment, refusal of assistance when the parent needs it. Everything you told me qualifies perfectly. The lawyer grabbed a notebook and started writing. We are going to need proof. Messages where he denied you help. Witnesses to the humiliations. Bank statements showing that you live on less than $1,000 a month, while he has a net worth of almost $2 million. Medical certificates proving your emotional state. I have messages. Perfect. Save everything. Do not delete anything. Not the cold replies. Not the read receipts. It all works. Robert spent the next 3 days gathering evidence as if his life depended on it. Because it did. He took screenshots of all the messages where he had asked for help and was ignored. There were dozens. Son, can you lend me $50? The electric bill came in high. No response. Charles, I ran out of medications. Can you help me? Read and ignored. Robert took his bank statements from the last 2 years. $600 in pension coming in. Rent, electricity, water, medications going out. Medications. Final balance at the end of the month, sometimes zero, sometimes negative. He called Pauline, the woman who worked in Valerie's building. He asked her if she would agree to be a witness. She hesitated. She was afraid of losing her job. But when Robert explained everything to her, she agreed. Robert, what they are doing to you is inhumane. I will testify. Yes. Robert sought out Irene, the one who had told him about the expensive restaurant. She agreed as well. He gathered the receipts for the loan he had taken out to fix the pipes. $1,500 at an abusive interest rate, while his son traveled to the Bahamas. Attorney Miller reviewed everything and put together a file. A thick 50-page file with attachments, evidence, photos, bank statements, everything. Robert, this case is practically won. But there is something I must ask you. So, what is it? Are you sure you want to take this all the way to the end? Because when we file this lawsuit, there will be no turning back. There will be frozen assets, seizures, public embarrassment. Your son will find himself backed against a wall, and he may never forgive you. Robert stayed quiet. He looked out the dirty window of his apartment. He watched the rain begin to fall. He thought about everything. About every diaper he changed. About every sleepless night when Charles had a fever. About every dollar spent on him. And then he thought about the expression on Charles's face at the dinner last week, when Robert asked for help and Charles sighed as if Robert were a burden. Robert looked at Attorney Miller. Forgiveness? He already lost me a long time ago, when he decided I was a nuisance. So let us do it. All right, I will need you to tell me when you want me to file the lawsuit. It can be today. It can be in a week. You decide. Leave it ready. I will let you know when the time is right. Robert went back home. He stored all the documents in a new folder. He hid it in the closet under his winter clothes. 2 days later, the invitation arrived via text message. Valerie had created a group chat. Charles's 40th birthday. The message was formal, cold. Dinner on May 10th, Saturday, 8 in the evening at our house. Elegant attire. Elegant. Robert did not even know what that meant. He looked in his closet. He had 3 decent dress shirts. He chose the beige linen one he had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago. It was the most presentable one. He went to Mr. Leonard, the cobbler, and asked him to shine his black shoes, the only dress shoes he owned. They were old, worn out, but after the shine, they looked decent. Robert took his father's pocket watch. It was kept in a small red velvet box in the drawer. Antique silver, heavy, with the initials JPF engraved. John Peter Fernandez. His father died when Robert was 20 years old. That watch was all that was left of him. It was worth little in money, but it meant everything in memories. Robert wrapped it carefully in brown paper. He taped a simple gold ribbon to it. He wrote on a card, "For my son, with a love that does not change even when everything else changes. Dad. The week before, the dinner was strange. Robert slept poorly. He would wake up at midnight with his heart racing. A part of him still doubted. He still thought maybe he was exaggerating, that maybe Charles would change. But then he remembered the sigh, that sigh of irritation when he asked for help, and the doubt would disappear. The morning of the dinner, Robert called Attorney Miller. "Good morning, sir. I just want to confirm something. Do you have the lawsuit ready?" "All ready? I just need you to give the signal." "Perfect. Keep an eye on your phone tonight because I am going to send a message. And when I send it, you file immediately." "Agreed." Silence on the other end. "Robert, is something going to happen tonight?" Robert smiled. A bitter smile, but a smile nonetheless. "Yes, justice is going to be served." Robert arrived at that dinner with a broken heart, but a straight spine, because for the first time in years he was not going to that house as the father begging for crumbs. He was going as the man who had finally learned that respect is not requested, it is demanded. Robert arrived at the penthouse 15 minutes past 8 because the subway was delayed, and he still had to walk 3 blocks in a light drizzle. His hair was damp, his shoes were too tight. The beige linen shirt had a faint smell of mothballs that Robert had tried to cover up with cheap cologne he bought at the pharmacy. Robert rang the intercom. It took them almost 2 minutes to answer. He could hear laughter on the other side of the door. Ambient music, the sound of clinking glasses. Valerie opened it. Tight black dress, open back, red stiletto heels, hair pulled back in a perfect high ponytail, flawless makeup, that French perfume that cost more than Robert's electric bill. She looked Robert up and down, quickly, evaluated, judged. "Good evening, Robert. Come in." "No, how are you?" "No, I'm so glad you came. Just come in." Robert walked in. The apartment smelled of expensive perfume and imported candles. Everything in there screamed money. The walnut hardwood floors, the massive paintings on the wall, a modern metal sculpture that seemed to serve no purpose other than being expensive. Robert felt small, out of place, like an intruder at his own son's party. The living room was crowded. Beautiful, elegant people holding glasses of red wine in crystal goblets. Overlapping conversations. Someone was laughing way too loud near the balcony. The apartment was even more luxurious than Robert remembered. A new chandelier, new paintings on the wall, leather couches that looked like they had never been used. Charles was in the middle of the living room. Sky blue dress shirt, no tie, gray slacks. He was laughing at something a red-bearded friend was telling him. He did not even see Robert walk in. Robert stood there, holding his gift wrapped in brown paper, feeling invisible. Valerie did not even introduce him to anyone. She just pointed to the table. "You can leave the gift over there." Robert placed his gift amidst boxes wrapped in sophisticated paper, satin bows, and designer bags. His brown paper wrapping looked like trash in the middle of all that. Charles finally saw Robert. He walked over to him. He did not hug him. He gave 2 quick air kisses, far from Robert's face. "Hello, Dad. I'm glad you came." The tone was formal, as if Robert were a distant acquaintance. "Happy birthday, son. 40 years. You're quite the man now." "Yes, time flies." Charles was already looking past Robert toward the rest of the living room. "Make yourself comfortable. There are drinks over there. The food will be out soon." And he walked away. He went back to his friends. Robert was left alone, a 72-year-old man in a second-hand beige shirt and tight shoes. In the middle of a party where nobody knew him and nobody cared, Robert poured himself a glass of water. He sat in a chair in the corner. He observed. They were all from that world. Lawyers, engineers, businessmen. They talked about financial markets, stocks, international travel. A blonde woman in a gold dress talked about a weekend in the Hamptons. A guy with sunglasses on his head, indoors, talked about buying an apartment in Miami as an investment. Robert was a ghost there. Dinner was served. Valerie had hired a catering service. Waiters in black vests circulated with trays. Grilled salmon, mushroom risotto, asparagus, a mixed berry dessert with cream, imported Italian wines. Robert sat at the end of the table. 12 people. Robert in the very last chair near the kitchen. He ate in silence. The salmon was good, but Robert could barely taste it. His stomach was tied in knots. It was during dessert when it started. Valerie, already on her third glass of wine, began to talk louder. She had that sparkle in her eyes of someone who gets loose with alcohol. Guys, you have no idea how much work it is to organize these things. Family is complicated, right? There's always that one person who, how should I say this, does not understand boundaries. As she did not look at Robert, but everyone understood. Someone laughed uncomfortably. Charles refilled his glass again. He did not say anything. Valerie continued. It is that whole thing, you know? There are people who think their kids are an ATM, who think it is normal to beg, beg, beg. Robert's face burned, but he did not lower his head. He looked directly at Valerie. She averted her gaze and laughed. But anyway, let us toast to Charles's 40th birthday. Everyone raised their glasses. Robert raised his glass of water, and that was when Charles, completely drunk, dropped the bomb. He looked at Robert with his red, glassy eyes and said in front of everyone, Dad, frankly, you're only good for spending money. The noise at the table stopped for a second as if someone had pressed pause. Charles continued, his voice thick, slurring his words. Ever since Mom died, it has been nothing but bills, nothing but problems. We are tired of funding your things. We are seriously tired of it. The table started moving again. Nervous laughter. Someone changed the subject, way too fast. A woman with curly hair launched into a conversation about a new restaurant. Valerie was smiling, that smile of victory. Robert sat there, motionless, gripping his water glass so hard he thought it would shatter, and then he felt it. It was not sadness. It was not shame. It was absolute clarity. This was no longer his son. This was a stranger, a man he had raised but who no longer existed. Robert reached for his bag. He opened it calmly. He pulled out his old cracked cell phone. He opened his messaging app under the table, hidden. He found the contact, Attorney Miller, and typed. His fingers did not tremble. It was as if someone else were typing. Someone steady. Someone tired of being trampled on. You can start the action immediately. Send. The message went through. 2 blue check marks. The lawyer saw it instantly. 3 little dots appeared. He was typing. Confirmed. I am filing tomorrow at 9 in the morning. The block will be automatic. Robert put his phone away. He took a deep breath. He finished his water. The table carried on. Valerie was pouring coffee. Someone told a joke that was not funny. Charles laughed loudly, out of control. Robert stood up. He grabbed his bag. He adjusted his second-hand beige shirt. He looked at his son, that 40-year-old man he no longer recognized, and said with the calmest voice he could muster, Charles, thank you for the dinner. I hope you liked the watch. It belonged to your grandfather, but maybe you are no longer interested in those kinds of things. Charles looked at him, confused, too drunk to understand. Are you leaving already, Dad? Yes. Good evening, everyone. Robert walked to the door. Nobody stood up. Nobody walked him out. In the hallway, before calling the elevator, Robert could still hear Valerie's voice, loud, pretending to whisper, What a drama queen! Oh, my God! Muffled laughter. Robert stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and there, alone in that mirrored box, Robert smiled. He smiled for the first time in months, maybe years, because he had just done the most powerful thing of his life. He had not yelled. He had not cried. He had not made a scene. He had sent a silent, lethal, precise message, and now he just had to wait. But Robert did not have to wait long, because at that precise moment, while Robert was going down in the elevator with his smile of vengeance, Charles's phone vibrated on his plate, and what he saw on that screen changed everything. Robert was in the cab. He had spent $20 he did not have because he could no longer stand waiting for the subway. When his phone rang, it was Charles. Robert watched the name blinking on the screen. He let it ring and ring and ring until it went to voicemail. It rang again. Robert did not answer. A text message, then another, then 3 more in a row. Robert did not open them, but he saw the previews on his lock screen. "Dad, call me. Urgent. Dad, is this a joke? For the love of God, answer the phone." Robert smiled. He turned off the phone. He shoved it deep into his bag. The cab driver looked at him through the rearview mirror. "Everything okay, sir?" "Everything is perfect." Robert arrived home. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment. He took off the shoes that were killing him. He sat on the edge of the bed. He turned his phone back on. 17 missed calls, 23 messages. Robert read them one by one, slowly, savoring every word of desperation. Let us go back to the penthouse. 3 minutes after Robert left, Charles was finishing his coffee when his cell phone vibrated. Once, twice, 3 times. He picked it up, looked at the screen, and froze. It was a notification from the bank. One of those red ones with exclamation marks. Judicial block alert. Procedure 0045-3-2025-8-75. Preventive freeze order on assets and funds in compliance with provisional rulings. Charles clicked on it. His hand was already shaking. He opened the app. The screen loaded slowly. That little spinning wheel that seems to last an eternity when you are desperate, and then it appeared. Balance frozen. $1,200,000. Credit line suspended. Credit card blocked. Below, in small letters, judicial block. Action for revocation of donation due to ingratitude. Plaintiff, Robert Peter Hernandez. Robert Peter Hernandez, his father. Charles read it twice, 3 times, as if the words were going to change. "What is going on?" Valerie asked from the other side of the table. She had already noticed the color drain from Charles's face. Charles did not answer. He opened the full message. There was an attached file, a PDF. He clicked it with trembling fingers. To the Honorable Judge of the Superior Court of New York, Robert Peter Hernandez, hereinafter the plaintiff, respectfully comes before your honor to file an action for revocation of donation due to ingratitude against Charles Robert Hernandez. Charles scanned the text. The words jumped out like stab wounds. Moral and material abandonment. Offense to the dignity of the donor. Public humiliation. Repeated refusal of assistance. Donation of $200,000. Registered before a notary with a revocation clause. $200,000. Adjusted for inflation and interest, according to the document, it now exceeded $400,000. Valerie had stood up from her chair. "What is happening?" Charles could not speak. He just handed the phone to Valerie. Valerie read it. Her eyes widened more and more. "This is a lie. He can't do this. He can't." "Yes, he can," one of Valerie's lawyer friends said. She had walked over, curious. She read over Valerie's shoulder. "Donation with a revocation clause. If severe ingratitude is proven, the law allows for revocation. And from what I see here, you guys are screwed." The silence that fell over that table was heavier than lead. The 12 guests stared, some with pity, others with that morbid curiosity of someone watching a circus catch fire and wanting to see how far it will go. Valerie started screaming. "This is absurd. He's doing it because he's vindictive. Because I don't let him manipulate Charles. This is not going to go anywhere." But the lawyer friend shook her head. "Yes, it will. There is strong case law. If he has proof of abandonment, of insults, of denying help, a judge grants it easily, and with a provisional order, the freeze is immediate." Charles tried to call Robert. Once, twice, 5, 10 times. Robert did not answer any of them. Charles sent messages. "Dad, I need to talk to you. Please answer. We can fix this by talking. This is not necessary." Valerie snatched the phone out of Charles's hands. "Stop humiliating yourself," he's going to see. We're going to hire the best lawyer in the city, and we're going to countersue him for, for whatever, the friend interrupted. Countersue for what? Because he's right. And if you don't have the cash to pay that money back, you're going to have to sell something. Silence. Sell what? Valerie asked with a strangled voice. Car, apartment, whatever's in his name. The judge can seize assets until the value is met. The party ended right there. The guests started to leave. Clumsy excuses. Oh, it's late. I have an early commitment tomorrow. It was great. Happy birthday, Charles. In 20 minutes, the apartment was empty. Only Charles and Valerie remained, and the heavy silence of someone who has just been run over by a train. Meanwhile, Robert was in his apartment, on the south side, lying in bed, reading Charles's messages calmly. The last one said, Dad, for the love of God, let's talk. I know I messed up. I'm sorry. Let's fix this. Don't let it go this far. Robert sighed. He blocked Charles's number. It was not cruelty. It was survival. Charles had had years to treat him with respect, years to help him when Robert asked, years to be the son Robert had raised. He chose to humiliate him in front of strangers on his own birthday. Now he was going to learn that a father is not a doormat, is not an ATM, is not someone you use and throw away. A father is a human being, with dignity, with boundaries, with rights, and Robert had just exercised his. Robert turned off the light, closed his eyes, and for the first time in 4 years, since Rose's death, he slept through the night without waking up with a heavy chest. Because justice, when it finally arrives, calms even the most broken heart. But the war was just beginning, because Valerie was not the kind of woman to accept defeat quietly, and over the next 4 months, Robert was going to discover just how far a desperate person is willing to go. The lawsuit was filed on a Monday at 9 in the morning. Attorney Miller called Robert at 9:15. Robert, it's done. The judge is the Honorable Eleanor Vance. She is known for being strict and impartial. That is good for us. Robert felt a shiver in his stomach, but it was not fear. It was adrenaline. And now we wait for their defense. They have 15 days to respond, but the freeze is already active. They can't touch the money until the judge decides. Robert hung up. He made himself some coffee. He sat by the window of his apartment and looked at the gray street below. Kids going to school, people rushing to work. Life going on as if nothing had changed. But for Robert, everything had changed. 3 days later, Charles showed up at his door. It was 11 in the morning. Robert was making vegetable soup, the same one he made every week because it lasted a long time and was cheap. There was a knock at the door, loud, desperate. Robert looked through the peephole. It was Charles, alone, without Valerie. Robert opened the door only as far as the chain allowed. Dad, I need to talk to you. We have nothing to talk about. Talk to my lawyer. Dad, for the love of God, open this door. Let's fix this. Robert looked him in the eyes. They were red. Robert did not know if it was from alcohol or crying. Maybe both. Fix it how, Charles? By humiliating me again? Calling me a burden? Charles lowered his head. I was drunk. I didn't mean that. Drunk? Do you think it was just that night? What about the other times I asked for help and you pretended not to see? And the 3 years you barely called to see if I was even alive? I know I messed up, Dad. I know. But we're family. Families don't fix things like this. Through the justice system. Robert let out a dry laugh. A family takes care of each other. A family respects each other. A family doesn't leave their father in need while traveling to the Bahamas. Charles stayed quiet. Drop this, please. I'll give you the money back. We can set up a payment plan, whatever it takes, but drop the lawsuit. No. The word came out firm. Dad. I said no, Charles. Leave. Robert closed the door. He heard Charles, on the other side, breathing heavily, then the footsteps going down the stairs. Robert went back to the kitchen. His soup had boiled over onto the stove. He turned off the burner. He sat on the floor. And he cried, because it still hurt. Even with all the rage, all the disappointment, it still hurt to see his son like that. But Robert did not back down. 2 weeks later, their defense arrived. Attorney Miller called Robert. Robert, they hired a big firm, Silver and Associates. Very expensive. They must be paying about $50,000 just in initial retainer fees. And what did they argue? Basically, that the donation was spontaneous, without coercion, that the relationship between father and son was always cordial, that you are resentful because he built his own life, that he always offered help, but that you rejected it out of pride. Robert almost laughed. Pride? That is what they are trying to sell. But Robert, we have the evidence. A lot of evidence. And they did. Attorney Miller had put together an 80-page presentation with attachments that reached 150 pages. Screenshots of the messages where Robert asked for help and was ignored. Date, time, read, receipt, confirmed. Bank statements for the loan Robert took out to fix the plumbing. Abusive interest rates, while Charles's bank account had a balance of over $100,000. Photos from Charles and Valerie's Instagram, the Bahamas, expensive restaurants, the BMW, all dated and printed. Robert's medical receipts, medications, doctor visits, all paid alone, while Charles said things were tight. And the witnesses. Pauline was the first. She testified in court on a rainy Thursday. Robert was there, sitting on the benches in the hallway, waiting. She came out of the courtroom and walked toward him. I told them everything, Robert. How Valerie talked badly about you on the phone. How she laughed at your calls. Everything. Irene was the second. She confirmed she had seen Charles and Valerie at expensive places, while Robert lived on less than $1,000 a month. And there was another witness Robert did not expect. Julian, a former co-worker of Charles, who had been present at the birthday dinner. He had felt so uncomfortable with the scene that he looked Robert up on Facebook and offered to testify. Robert, what he did to you at that dinner was inhumane. I have a father. I would never speak to him like that. I want to help you. Attorney Miller presented everything to the judge in a spiral-bound binder with colored dividers, highlighters, comparative income charts, and a timeline of events. It was a technical massacre. Their defense, no matter how expensive, could do nothing against the facts. Charles tried to seek out Robert 3 more times. He showed up at the market where Robert always bought his groceries. He stood in front of him among the vegetable stands. Dad, listen to me. Robert avoided him, kept walking. Charles sent flowers to his address, a bouquet of yellow roses with a card. Forgive me, I love you. Robert gave the flowers to Mrs. Collins, his neighbor. Charles called from unknown numbers. Robert would recognize the voice and hang up. Valerie, curiously, had disappeared. She did not try to talk to Robert a single time. Robert thought she knew she had nothing to say, or that she was ashamed, or both. But Robert found out through Pauline that their marriage was cracking. Constant fighting. Valerie blamed Charles for not cutting ties with him sooner. Charles blamed Valerie for poisoning his mind against him. The luxurious apartment, the imported car, the trips. None of that sustains a marriage built on vanity. 2.5 months after the trial began, the conciliation hearing took place. Robert was on one side of the long table, Charles and Valerie on the other, the lawyers in the middle, the judge at the head. Valerie wore a gray tailored suit, perfect makeup, but Robert saw the poorly concealed dark circles under her eyes, the nervousness in her fingers that would not stop clicking a pen. Charles looked thinner, with an unshaven beard, staring at the floor. The judge got straight to the point. We are here to attempt a settlement. Mr. Charles, do you have something to propose? Charles's lawyer stepped forward. Your Honor, my client proposes to reimburse $150,000, staggered over 24 months with no interest. Attorney Miller responded before the judge could even speak. Rejected. The updated value is over $400,000, paid in full or asset seizure. Valerie exploded. "Do you think we just have that money lying around? This is abusive. This is extortion." The judge banged her gavel. "Silence! I am the one speaking here. And according to the documentation I have reviewed, you and your husband have sufficient assets to cover that amount. A car worth $80,000, a property worth over $2 million. Don't come to me with speeches about impossibility." Valerie turned red. The judge looked at Robert. "Mr. Robert, do you accept any installment plan?" Robert looked at his son, that man he had raised, that he had loved, that had broken him, and said, "No, Your Honor, I want the full amount, as the law mandates." Charles looked up. There were tears in his eyes, but Robert did not lower his, because for the first time in his life, Robert had learned that boundless compassion turns you into a doormat, and Robert would never again be anyone's doormat, not even his own son's. The verdict came out on a Tuesday, 4 months and 3 days after Robert sent that text message at the dinner. Attorney Miller called Robert at 11 in the morning. Robert was hanging clothes on the clothesline in the courtyard of his building. "Robert, you won. Completely." Robert dropped the wet clothes back into the basket. He sat on the hot concrete floor. "Won how?" "Completely. The judge accepted all our arguments. She ordered your son to reimburse $420,000, adjusted for inflation, within 60 days. If he doesn't pay, immediate asset seizure." Robert stayed quiet. It was not joy he felt. It was something strange, a mix of victory and mourning. "The ruling is beautiful, Robert." The judge was harsh. "She wrote that disrespecting paternal dignity cannot be tolerated under any pretext, especially when it is proven that the father gave up his own assets in favor of the ungrateful son." Those are her words. Ungrateful son. Robert hung up. He sat there on the hot floor, looking at the blue sky, and cried. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, as if a giant weight had been lifted off his back. Charles and Valerie did not have the cash. They had assets. But assets do not turn into cash overnight. They tried to appeal. The expensive lawyer filed a motion. Rejected. They tried a petition for an extraordinary payment plan. Rejected. The judge was clear. The defendant demonstrated sufficient financial capacity to restitute the value. Let him sell his luxury goods if necessary. And that is exactly what happened. The shiny silver BMW, bought less than a year ago, went to the judicial auction lot. It sold for $40,000, less than what they had paid, but it was still a considerable sum. With that money, they paid down the debt to Robert. They were still short a massive amount, but the damage was already done. Valerie could not handle it. According to Pauline, who heard everything through the office hallways, Valerie blamed Charles every single day. "If you had listened to me, if you had cut him off sooner, now we lost the car because of that old man. That old man who had given his life for that man." 3 weeks after the payment, Charles sent a message to Robert from his own number, which Robert had unblocked for matters regarding the lawsuit. "Dad, I transferred the money. I hope you're happy. I learned too late, but I learned." Robert did not reply. A week later, another message. "Valerie asked for a divorce. She says she can no longer stand the humiliation of having lost the car, that the life she imagined is over. I think she never truly loved me. She loved what I could give her." Robert did not reply to that either, but he admitted feeling a twinge, not of satisfaction for their separation, but of sadness, because his son was reaping what he had sown. With the money in the bank, Robert went straight to a real estate agency. "I want to buy an apartment, small, no financing." The agent, a young woman with curly hair, took him to see 5 options. Robert chose a 2-bedroom on the outskirts of the city, 4th floor with an elevator, no leaks, no mold, windows that closed properly, a clean bathroom with a glass shower. It cost $250,000. Robert negotiated it down to $240,000. With the remaining money, Robert bought simple furniture, a new bed, the first brand new bed of his life, a beige love seat, a small coffee table, a refrigerator, a stove, a small washing machine, and he still had money left over to take a baking course he had always wanted to take. Robert had always dreamed of making custom cakes, pies, fine pastries. At 72 years old, starting over seemed impossible. But there he was, in his new kitchen, with his clean apron, learning how to make a millefeuille. Charles tried to seek out Robert in person twice after the sentencing. The first time Robert was returning from the market. Charles was standing at the door of his new building. He had discovered the address. Robert did not know how. "Dad, can we talk?" "Talk about what, Charles?" "About everything. About how I was an idiot. About how I let that woman push you away. About how—" Robert interrupted him. "She didn't let you do anything. You chose to. Every time I asked for help, and you pretended not to see. Every time I called, and you hung up. Every time I needed you, and you said things were tight. Those were your decisions, not hers." Charles swallowed hard. "I know. I know that now." "Perfect. Then learn to live with it." Robert went upstairs. Charles did not follow him. 6 months after the end of the trial, a handwritten letter arrived. 3 pages. Robert recognized Charles's crooked handwriting, the same one he had taught him when he was 6 years old. Charles wrote that he accepted a lesser job at another company, lower salary, no benefits, that he lived in a simple rented apartment across town, that Valerie had remarried an older, wealthier businessman. "She found what she always wanted," Charles wrote bitterly. And then came the passage that made Robert cry. "Dad, I learned the hard way that family cannot be bought with money. It is built with presence, with respect, with true love. I threw away the most important person in my life out of pride, for a woman who never truly loved me. And now when I look in the mirror, I don't like the man I see. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just hope you are happy, because you always deserved more than what I gave you." Robert folded the letter, put it in a drawer. He did not reply. Not yet. Maybe someday. Maybe never. But for the first time, the decision belonged to Robert, and only to Robert. Today, a year and a half after that cursed dinner, Robert wakes up in his own apartment, makes his coffee in his kitchen, opens the curtains of his window that has no leaks. He has 3 regular clients for cakes. Mrs. Shirley orders a cake every Saturday, Julie wants a tart every month for her daughter's birthday, and Christian called him to make the desserts for his niece's wedding. It is not a fortune, but it is dignity, it is autonomy, it is knowing he does not depend on anyone. Sometimes at night, Robert still thinks about Charles, wonders how he is doing, if he really learned, if he changed. But then he remembers. Charles's life is no longer his responsibility. It never was. Robert did his part, more than his part. Now it is up to Charles to learn to be a real man. One Saturday morning, 3 months after receiving Charles's letter, Robert was in his kitchen decorating a tres leches cake for Mrs. Shirley. There was a knock at the door. Robert wiped his hands on his apron, looked through the peephole. It was Charles, but this time it was different. He did not come desperate. He did not come begging. He came with a grocery bag in his hand, a simple shirt, jeans, worn-out shoes. Robert opened the door, completely without the chain. "Hello, Dad." "Charles, I know I don't deserve to be here. I know you may never forgive me, but—" Charles lifted the bag. "I brought tomatoes, peppers, cilantro, onions. I thought maybe we could make some salsa, like before, like when I was a kid and you would teach me." Robert stayed quiet. He looked at his son. This man was no longer the arrogant guy from the dinner. He was a broken man, humble, perhaps finally self-aware. "You came just to make salsa. I came to try to be the son I should have always been. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I'm just asking for permission to try. If you will let me." Robert took a deep breath. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness is earned, with time, with actions, not with pretty words or bags of vegetables, but it was a start. "Come in," Robert said. "But you are going to chop the onions. My eyes can't take the burning any more." Charles smiled, a small, shy smile. like a child who has just been given a second chance he does not deserve, but who is going to honor it with everything he has. They walked into the kitchen. Robert handed him a knife. Charles started chopping, and for the first time in years, Robert felt something resembling hope. It was not the relationship they had before. That one was broken forever. But maybe, just maybe, they could build something new, something based on real respect, on mutual dignity. While Charles chopped onions in silence, crying, and Robert did not know if it was because of the onions or everything else, Robert thought of Rose, of how she had insisted on that document, of how she had seen what he refused to see. "Protect your future," she had said. "Trust, but document." And she was right, as always. Robert looked at his father's pocket watch that Charles had returned to him a week after the verdict, with a note, "This never should have left your house. Forgive me." The watch was now on a shelf in the living room, keeping time, reminding Robert that lost time cannot be recovered, but dignity can. That night, after Charles left, after they made salsa together in silence, after Charles asked if he could come back next Saturday, and Robert said, "We will see." Robert sat on his new couch. He looked at his apartment, his kitchen, his furniture, his new life, and smiled. It was not the life he had planned. It was not the relationship with his son he had dreamed of, but it was his, built on dignity, on self-respect, on the certainty that never again would anyone treat him as less than he deserved. And that, Robert thought, was worth more than any penthouse on the Upper East Side. It was worth more than any BMW. It was worth everything. Because in the end, the only opinion that really matters is the one we have of ourselves. And Robert, for the first time in years, was proud of the man he saw in the mirror. 3 years have passed since that cursed dinner. Robert is now 75 years old. He wakes up every morning at 6, makes his coffee, opens the curtains of his apartment, and watches the sun rise over the city. His bakery business grew. It is no longer 3 clients. It is 10, sometimes 12. He makes sweet 16 cakes, small wedding tarts, decorated cookies for baby showers, seasonal pastries that sell like hotcakes. He earns a comfortable living. He is not rich, but he is free. He is dignified. He is his own man. Charles comes over every other Saturday. He always brings something, fresh vegetables from the market, seasonal fruit. Once he brought cement and helped Robert fix a crack in the wall. They do not talk much. There is still pain, there are still scars, but there is respect. And that for Robert is enough. Valerie got divorced again. The wealthy businessman turned out to be a womanizer. According to Pauline, Valerie now lives alone in a smaller apartment downtown, working at a small law firm. She no longer carries designer bags. Robert feels no satisfaction at her downfall. He only feels indifference. Valerie is no longer part of his story.